Thank you, Steve, and thank you, Heartland, for this whole session. I'm delighted that there's so many people left in the room. It's late in the day, and usually this is when I take my nap, so if I drop off, you'll understand why. Let's see, I get to look down there and see what I'm actually talking about. All right, endangerment finding. What is this all about? Well, the interesting issue and thought here, I have to come clean in the first place. I think this is a great visual. You see all that pollution. As Anthony Scalia made the point, as a matter of law, anything in the air is pollution, including a Frisbee. And so if you look at that picture I had, or you look at the one on the left here, that's just water vapor. If you want to see real pollution, the one on the right is purely pollution. That, of course, is the papal smokestack. And from all the comments that we've heard from the Pope, I'm not sure why they don't have something controlling that. What I want to make, and I'll make my point early on, is that this endangerment finding can only be reconsidered if it begins with reconsidering the science itself. Until the science is redone, there is no way to move past whether or not this stuff endangers human health and welfare. And as you'll find, the science demonstrates that a change in climate physics and phenomena have to be outside, this is the science in me talking, outside the normal variation that we see in climate. And yet, people never talk about that. They talk about little bitty changes, much like the last panel, little bitty changes that someone can claim are associated therewith. And this is a critical element of the science that's got to be looked at. And then I think what's really important here, and most people don't grasp, this is sort of inside the Beltway, Washington, D.C. speak. The major studies on which EPA relied are either the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change report or the National Research Council's report from NAS, or the piece that came out essentially out of the Office of Science and Technology Policy. And it's OSTP that put out the piece, in essence, just last Friday, that is an alarmist view of the whole problem, and it represents what the last president had to say and his administration, because this president has yet to get somebody into OSTP to get their hands around the bad science. And so if you have that report sitting out there, and then Scott Pruitt decides he's going to put a bunch of people in a room and come up with a different report, now you have competing reports. And that is not how you run a train. And so if this is going to be done, if you're going to reconsider the science to reconsider the endangerment finding, you've got to bring these two together somehow. Well, let's talk about the authority to make an endangerment finding. The way this works is just because there's a pollutant doesn't mean it's necessarily dangerous. There's all kinds of pollutants. The Frisbees are, of course, dangerous if you've had too many beers and you're out on your dorm front lawn and you're throwing it to the other guy. It'll hit somebody in the face, and that's dangerous. But that doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to be controlled under the Clean Air Act. It has to be something that harms human health or welfare, and there isn't just one such finding. These findings are done multiple times by the agency. Now, having made these, and let me just clarify that. You take a pollutant, let's say greenhouse gases, and you say greenhouse gases cause problems which endanger human health and welfare. Then you go in and you say, okay, automobiles produce carbon dioxide, and therefore that industry causes or contributes to endangerment of health and welfare. Coal-fired power plants, natural gas-fired power plants, airplanes. The list can be as long as you wish to make it. I'm waiting for them to come out and say Republican voters exist and are a primary cause of air pollution from CO2 and therefore should be regulated. In any case, what's important is once you make an endangerment finding, The law requires, it doesn't offer you the opportunity, it mandates certain actions. And I know this is going to be hard to read, and I don't intend for you to necessarily read it here, but I just want to go over it to show you the significance of all that's there. Under 108, if you find that it causes or contributes to air pollution, you have to publish what's called a NAAQS, a National Ambient Air Quality Standard. Well, EPA hasn't done that. But if I'm an environmental crazy and I want to do something, I'm going to go to court tomorrow while there's still an endangerment finding in place and sue EPA for not having put in a NAAQS. And then EPA would be forced to write a National Ambient Air Quality Standard. And having had that standard in place, it means all the states have to come up with state implementation plans on how to reduce their carbon dioxide or their greenhouse gases. Then we have stationary sources. And this is where the Clean Power Plan comes in, 111B and D. And when we find that an industry that's a stationary source is a problem, then they have to regulate that. Then 202 is, and this is where the agency began, by the way, motor vehicles. So if we find that the greenhouse gases endanger human health or welfare, we have to regulate CO2 from these vehicles. And then you've got, and I love this one because it is one of the two that is incredibly sweeping. No one's used it yet, and if someone would pay me a lot of money, I mean a lot of money, I would sue EPA to make them do this because I could get a lot of money. But international air pollution, if it's found that emissions that are a pollutant that endangers human health and welfare in some other country, under those conditions, the states are required to put into their state implementation plans controls over that pollutant. And they could do that tomorrow. I mean, you could just go, boom, I want to see CO2 reduction in every state implementation plan. How are you going to shut down your coal-fired power plants? How are you going to go to pure electric vehicles? How are you going to kill your cow herds and the like? So those are just four. We're not done yet. We got aircraft, and they're working on that one. We got tank vessels, which are ships that carry a lot of fuels, and you actually do get some emissions, significant emissions from some of these. They're not CO2, they're volatile organic kinds of things. And then there's the stratosphere one, and I just love this one because if you have anything that, quote, may reasonably be anticipated to affect the stratosphere, well then you've got to control these substances, practices, processes, or activities. Well, gosh, that is such a broad mandate. You could do anything you wanted under that mandate, under the Section 615. This is where the ozone controls and the worry about the ozone hole came out from. That's why this section was put in place. But the language is so amorphous that anyone could interpret it any way they want. And who interprets the law? Well, okay, if it's ambiguous, the agency gets to decide, and under this administration they would argue vehemently that somehow or another this doesn't apply. But the D.C. Circuit Court of Appeals would be the ones that have the final say on that, and I assure you that you can't find an adequate number of them who are going to be able to come back in and say, no, it's okay, you don't have to do anything. So this is why the endangerment finding has to be redone. Because if it isn't redone, someone's going to come in, sue the agency, and make them regulate, no matter who's sitting in the White House trying to tweet. And so when you look at that, I just want to go back on the 2009 greenhouse gas endangerment. This is the finding that people probably most want to look at. And if you can knock out the core endangerment finding itself, the one that says that greenhouse gases endanger both public health and public welfare for current and future generations, you pretty much clean the deck. Because this is the one on which all the others, not only the other endangerment findings, but the other regulations rely. And then you've got the and the other ones is not that it's endangerment, it's cause or contribute significantly to the emissions. And so that endangerment finding goes away if you've already decided that whatever you're looking at doesn't really endanger human health and welfare. But it's conceivable that you could say, yeah, it causes a problem, but it's not significant. It's not a significant source. It's sort of a second-hand way to get at this. I don't know that anybody is clever enough at the agency right now to sort of tease out this, and I don't think that they want to go down that road either, but it is possible. Well, as I said, there's really only one that matters, and that's the greenhouse gases endanger human health and the welfare, and you've just got to address that. And so how does it make this finding? Well, as I said, they rely primarily on major assessments by the Global Warming Group, the USGCRP, and the IPCC, and the NRC, and the National Academies. And so what has to be done for the science is for the Office of Science and Technology Policy to rewrite the climate science special report. And doing it that way, you get a report that's clean, fresh, has all the honest science in it, and deals with it. The question comes up, can EPA just do a red team, blue team thing on its own? Well, yeah, they could. But as I mentioned, if you've got the OSTP report sitting over here, and they're the president's science people, and you got EPA over here, and they're not together, you have a problem. It's a big problem, and it will be used as a wedge on the debate. So you're only going to get EPA to be successful if they do it in full coordination with the White House Office of Science and Technology Policy. You must address each of the lines of evidence that EPA took up. That's a legal issue. You've got to simply deal with each of the arguments that were made. And for those of you who've been following this issue, that's really not that difficult. And you have to do it in a manner that provides for notice and comment by the public. And there is a suggestion that EPA is going to try to go down this route and have a red team, blue team as part of a notice and comment on a proposed reconsideration of something, I don't know what, probably a rule. So it's conceivable, but still, you got to get OSTP involved. The foundational questions in terms of human health and welfare have really to do with only two things. The global temperature, which people admit, the scientists that I've heard this week say that's not a very good measure at all, surface temperature, but that's what EPA relied on, and the ocean pH. Now, let me just give you a couple of quick items. The argument is that if you increase human-caused greenhouse gases, then you must have an increase in the temperature. And the increase has to be in both the low temperatures and the high temperatures measured each day. You see, we typically use an average temperature. Well, we know the low temperatures are affected by the urban heat island effect and the like. And so if we just throw out the crap that's in the low temperatures and just look at the high temperatures and say, have the high temperatures gone up? Because if this is a problem, they should have. Well, here are the average daily maximum temperatures at all the stations that are followed. And you'll notice, over the last nearly 100 years, they aren't going up. And I like this one even better. What percentage of these weather stations recorded summer days over 95 degrees Fahrenheit? It's been going down. It ought to be going up. And it's this kind of information that is compelling and I think we can show is important. I want to take just a second with this graph. It's a bit confusing, but it has to do with ocean pH. The blue lines, the blue dots at the bottom is CO2. And you'll notice that as you get to the right-hand side, it goes flying upward. Now, keep in mind the scale here. We're talking about thousands of years here, so we're really just looking at the far right-hand side. The green is the actual ocean pH that we know of in the South China Sea. And the red dots are pH in Flinders, which is not very far away, but it's still out in the Pacific. Let me close up on that. And you'll notice that this pH that we find is a very broad band. It's all over the map. And just to give you an idea, look at the green line. The currently measured numbers are no different than we've seen for 6,000, 7,000 years. And so, once again, if you're going to have a problem and it's pH, well, you should be able to see it. Well, I don't think you can see it. And so I would just leave with Nikola Tesla and Isaac Asimov, two very good scientists. A lot of people don't realize how good a scientist Asimov was because he's a science fiction writer. But basically, the saddest aspect of life right now is that science gathers knowledge faster than society gathers wisdom, and that's the challenge that we're in. Thank you.